The DolphinsTalk.com podcast network is sponsored by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive, Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship it to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com, Caneswear.com.
You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast, the most listened to daily Miami Dolphins podcast on the internet.
Miami's got the Dolphins, the greatest of all.
Come on, Dolphins fans. Time to fins up.
We're in the air, we're on the ground, we're always in control. And when you say Miami, you're talking Super Bowl. Cause we're the Miami Dolphins, Miami Dolphins, Miami Dolphins number one. Miami Dolphins, Miami Dolphins, Miami Dolphins number one.
Hello, Dolphin fans, and welcome back to another very special episode of Dolphins Talk. My name is Marino, and today I am joined by the host of Drive Time Podcast, part of the Miami Dolphins Podcast Network, the lovely and talented Travis Wingfield. Travis, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. I know we've been talking about this show for a few months now, so I appreciate your patience and making sure that I can get through training camp without having additional things on the schedule, because that's a busy time of year. So appreciate your patience, and I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Absolutely. Yes, you are a busy guy, but we appreciate it because you have kept all of us in the know on everything going on this preseason. And so we couldn't be as knowledgeable as we are without you. So thank you so much for doing that.
I love doing it. Part of the job.
There you go. Well, we will not waste any time and jump right into it. I'm going to start a little bit easier here before we get into things like the offensive line and some of the other pressing questions. So let's first just talk about a little bit about this defense. As we know, the defense got a facelift this offseason. Many familiar faces gone, many new faces brought in, along with a new defensive philosophy with our new coach, Anthony Weaver. What are your thoughts on all of the changes on defense for the Dolphins this offseason?
You know, I think my favorite part about it so far, and this goes back to all the acquisitions and a very busy offseason for the Dolphins, remaking this defense under Coach Weaver's vision, is that you can see the vision. You can see where the pieces fit to what you can assume he might run. And I just want to caution fans, because we can take a look at previous, stops and their experience for coaches with regards to the scheme they might run, but they're always going to have their own flavor and their own different types of, personal preferences they run in terms of their scheme. But if you take it down to its base and down to its studs, and, he talked about the different influences that he has had, whether it's, Mike McDonald or going back to Romeo Crennel and all of his coaching stops, I do think you can kind of point to a version of those two defenses, the last year with the Ravens and what he did previously with the Houston Texans, where he was kind of under Romeo Crennel to begin with before getting that DC job. And I just look at the ability to be flexible and versatile on defense, which I know every team kind of says that every year, but with the simplistic way that they want to create pressure on the opposing quarterback, is to essentially have everybody in the front be able to run their rush lanes or their blitz lanes, whatever it might be, from every spot across the front, so that you can be able to rotate guys in and out and keep the same defensive calls. And then on the back end, I mean, the Ravens last year were one of the best teams at being able to incorporate different sub packages and their big nickel looks, with Kyle Hamilton being this very versatile safety they took in the first round. I look at Javon Holland kind of similarly in that way. But to go after a Kendall Fuller and to pair him with Jalen Ramsey as guys that are just as good inside, if not better inside, than they are on the perimeter, that allows them to be really matchup specific with, whether it's Kader Kohu or Ethan Bonner. They can basically dictate the terms of the offense and then get the matchups they prefer and go with those. I think that was the best part about this defense, is just how how much symmetry there seems to be with the front office and Coach Weaver and what he needs, which different discussion for a different day. But that's my favorite part about Chris Grier and his front office is that they seem to really understand what their coaches want and they go get those players accordingly.
I mean, that's great news. I know as just from a football fan perspective, a Dolphin fan, there seemed to be this lack of chemistry and connection, especially it seemed to be like a division last year of the defense versus Mike McDaniel and what was going on. And it seems to be much more of a collusion this time. And that's exciting to hear. And I know a lot of us are so geared up to see what Anthony Weaver brings. And that secondary that you mentioned, I mean, it's pretty stacked. I'm excited to see what they have to bring this year for sure to the table. So.
Yeah, it's all the additions they made too. Because, when you watch Marcus May was a guy that, he's been a really good pro for a long time. He started every game he's played. And at this stage of his career, you kind of have to wonder, like, what are you going to get with a player like that? Or Jordan Poyer, even. He was late into their career. But it only took a few snaps for me to watch Marcus Poyer in the preseason running around, hitting everything that moved. And the way those two guys can kind of operate as like quasi linebackers or just kind of move around the defense, to me, it really frees up what Javon Holland does best, is kind of being a roamer that can, operate in many different roles. So yeah, I love all those additions they made in that back. And it's a deep group. And if you look across the NFL, especially at cornerback, there are some thin secondaries out there. Yeah. That's not the case for the Dolphins.
Well, good news to our ears. So before we move on from defense, I just thought it was interesting. So the Dolphins put out recently who their captains are going to be. And I saw that Calais Campbell made one of the team captains. And I thought that was pretty cool based on the fact that he's a new player to the team. It wasn't something I was necessarily expecting. Can you shed a little insight on that? Did you expect Calais to possibly be one of those captains for this team?
It is a rare thing because, I think Jordan Brooks is a guy that could have been in that same category, but doesn't have the 16-year career behind him that Calais Campbell does to kind of serve as, this guy maybe knows a thing or two. And, it's like I talked to Teron Armstead about this a few weeks ago about how, like, you've seen every run scheme known to mankind. He's like, facts. That's a fact. Calais Campbell's the exact same way. I mean, they call him OG. And you feel him in his presence, like, right away. He's the kind of guy that I can stop in the hallway and ask a question about, like, playing a 3 technique versus a 5 technique. And he has all the time in the world for a podcaster. So you can imagine how much time he has for, a Zach Sealer or the younger guys trying to get questions, Brandon Peely, who might have questions about, hey, over 16 years, maybe you learned something in this league. And he certainly has. So I think that, and that's kind of like an intentional aspect of this offseason to me was signing certain types of guys. I think Jordan Poyer fits that mold very, very well. Also, a guy like Jonnu Smith kind of has that, you talk about the post-game show with me, Seth, and OJ, you're going to promote it eventually. We always say a guy has certain ish to him because we can't say that what we actually want to say. And that's, to me, what a lot of these veterans they brought in have is just this certain, like, dog mentality and a certain temperament. And Calais has that. He's one of the best mentors a player could ask for. It's like you said, it's rare, but for Calais Campbell, I honestly would have expected nothing less.
Well, that's awesome. We are, I was excited to see his name, and it's great to have so many of these vets really kind of helping out these rookies and taking them under their wing. So it's been a great thing to get to hear about this offseason. So kind of shifting a little bit to some of these other some rookies and not vets now. So we had former NFL linebacker Sean Merriman on Dolphins Talk a couple weeks back with Mike, and he said he believes that Chop Robinson was the steal of the draft and will be Defensive Rookie of the Year. In your eyes, you were there, you were down in the guts of it this offseason. How did Chop look to you during training camp?
So what Chop did, from my perception, was go from a guy that I thought maybe in his first year might have to be in more of that sub role that we kind of talked about with the defensive backfield, as a guy that comes into certain situations and impacts the game that way. And we saw in that first drive against the Buccaneers in the last preseason game where he kind of got washed out a few times against the run. So he'll have to continue to work on that. I mean, any rookie, any player for that matter, always has development that can happen in their game. But I thought that his pass rush ability alone was better than I thought it could be. And not just in situational rushes, in one-on-one situations where he was just lining up against a guy and beating him and getting after the quarterback and moving him off the spot. And I think I tweeted at some point or various points throughout camp that Patrick Paul had been so good that the only guy that really gave him issues in camp was Chop Robinson.
I announced that on one of our shows that we did. I said, Travis Wingfield said it.
Hey, has to be true then, right? No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, yeah, that was my big impression from him, was just how impressive he was from an athletic standpoint, because Patrick Paul is so athletic and so long, and just to beat that guy one-on-one is impressive in its own right because of those traits that he offers. But, I thought, going back to his Penn State tape, he was a guy that would line up in a nose backer position, which is kind of like an off-ball nose tackle, where he's in a 2-point stance, mugged up over the center in the A gap. And from there, the way he gets off the football, the way you have to slide your protection to deal with that type of urgency, because the quickest point to the quarterback is right over the quarterback, right? Mm-hmm. And so the way the protection slides, if you don't get that picked up, it's obviously over from that point. But if you commit the bodies, if you get your running back to step up and take that A gap, or you get a tight end that comes across the formation in motion and digs out that A gap rusher, then now you've got Bradley Chubb and Jaylen Phillips when they're full go off the edge, one-on-one, which if I can create those guys in one-on-one situations, I know I'm going to get a lot of sacks and quarterback pressures. So he went from a guy that I thought was going to have that kind of role. And, the injuries and the situation with Shaq Barrett's retirement, you probably do have to see him regardless of whether or not he was ready early in the season. But I think that he's a guy that can play more than just that kind of third rusher sub-package role, and a guy that can impact games right away as a starter, really.
Yeah. Well, we're excited. I'm excited to see him on the field. And I mean, he was somebody too that I don't think a lot of us, when we're drawing up our mock drafts, had him on our list of we thought the Dolphins were going to take him at number 1, but it sounds like it's working out well, and we'll see how it goes for him, but we're all rooting for him for sure. So Tua, he is always a hot topic of conversation with Dolphin fans, as we know, and the whole NFL in general, basically.
You're not kidding.
After leading the NFL in passing yards and playing an entire season last year, what do you think is the next evolution of his game, and how do you think he can raise that game this year?
Yeah, so I'll give you some low-hanging fruit, and then I think a little bit more of a nuanced observation. The low-hanging fruit is the athletic ability, right? And that's something that he's talked about with, an element of his game that he thought he needed to get better at last year was being bigger and just having more bulk to take the punishment of an NFL season. I think we saw all but 8 quarterbacks in the league last year missed at least one start throughout the course of the entire season. So he's one of those guys that played every game. And I think when you go back to the drawing board, it was more of the jiu-jitsu and his ability to correctly fall and take those hits and absorb those hits that prevented the injury more so than the physical stature. And so he's down weight. He looks fantastic. I mean, he is moving around. He's jumping up off the spot. He's working on these throws that I haven't seen him make before, where he kind of runs and flips the hips and throws it across his body and has this easy gas to layer the ball in those spots. So I think from the physical standpoint, just his dropped weight and added elusiveness, which, I was like the original Tua stan when you go back to 2017, and I was like, this is the guy that can change our organization if we get him. And one of the big reasons for that was because he was so springy off the top of the drop in the pocket. He was so good at creating when the rush broke, or when the protection broke down and the rush got in. And then that kind of, the hip injury, catastrophic hip injury, can change that. And I feel like he's kind of been building towards this to get back to what I think he is today, which to me more reflects his Alabama, college tape. And the more nuanced take is just the presence in the offense for the third season and the value of coming back with the same play caller, a lot of the same offensive linemen, a lot of the same skill guys. There's so much continuity in this offense. And I think from Tua's perspective, with how that allowed them to approach the offseason from an OTA's perspective, from a training camp perspective, it just gave him a better feel for what is next beyond the built-in bread and butter open throws, the shots to Tyreek and to Jaylen Waddle. I feel like now this entire offseason and the repping of all these stuff from tape that he saw last year has given him more autonomy to be able to go beyond what the offense was the last 2 years. So more mental stability and just, a gradual improvement in that area, I think is going to make a big impact on what he's already great at. I think he's going to be even better at this year.
Right on. And let me ask you this. I talked with Omar Kelly on our podcast too last week, and he was talking about Coach John Beck, quarterback coach, and he said he wasn't sold on the idea. But then he said when he saw Tua in offseason, he saw this much more velocity on that ball, and he was kind of attributing it to him working with John Beck. Did you see that same difference as well?
Yeah, I thought there was a little more refinement in the mechanic aspect of his game. because he talked about this back in, I think it was OTAs, the rubber band theory, where kind of like I do this all the time in the podcast and my fans don't always love it all the time, but comparing it to a golf swing where it's like your action with your body and your hips needs to be like already in motion before the throwing motion begins. And I think that creates what Mike McDaniel referred to as easy gas or easier gas, where it just takes like less effort to push the ball down the field, which means you can get it out faster. So I do agree. And I think that the biggest element you saw that within was those throws on the move. We saw a little bit in the preseason game, not a lot of it, but a little bit of it in the preseason action, but a lot of it out here at training camp.
Okay, right on. Well, I'm excited for that as well. This is going to be an amazing season. So let's talk a little bit too about another rookie of ours, rookie Jaylen Wright. He looked excellent in preseason and opened a lot of people's eyes. So, I mean, this running back core is crazy. I mean, Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, Jeff Wilson Jr. also on this roster. How much do you think that Jaylen Wright will see playing time this season on the field?
I've gotten that question so many times, and I don't really know how to answer it because on one hand, I'm watching this guy play, and I just think he's really, really good. Like the way he hits the hole with conviction on those inside runs and the way it pairs with the speed to the perimeter, and you saw it in his pass receiving as well. There was a catch he had in the Tampa Bay game where he ran a flare where his back is to the goal line that he's going towards. And then in this one motion, he's able to flip his hips around and get going towards the right goal line, catch the football, and then easily transition into a runner after the catch. Like that is rare, Marissa. That is so rare that you can have that type of flexibility and movement skills, as a running back catching the football out of the backfield. But where do the carries come from? Because Raheem Mostert is a top 10 back for my money. He's a franchise record holder for single season touchdowns. And Devon Achane is even more productive in an efficiency standpoint. So where the hell do the carries come from? I think the way you might get him the football is, Achane's role expanding more in the passing game and kind of protecting him from some of those inside runs that maybe can, cause more wear and tear as the year goes along. And I think that from that aspect, Wright can get some action where he fits in. But they didn't draft him to just keep him on the bench. Like he's going to get playing time. And how they figure that out, that's for Mike McDaniel to know and us to find out.
For the heads a little bit bigger than ours, I can figure that out for
100%.
sure. All right, so let's get to everyone's favorite topic, dun, 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 the offensive line. Okay, so instead of this debate that we've been doing, which is it good enough, let's just kind of pivot a little bit. We know Chris Grier and Mike McDaniel aren't as worried about it as we as fans seem to be. So let's look at this from a little bit of a different angle. It appears the Dolphins are kind of taking an approach that Butch Barry with his little fairy dust and Frank Smith can coach up the talent they have in-house with people like Robert Jones, Liam Eichenberg, Lester Cotton, and maximize rather than going out and paying for a high-priced free agent. Do you agree that this kind of appears to be their approach? And also, if you do you feel it to be a little risky since this is kind of a team that we're building to like win now?
I'll answer the second part of that first, because I think that there's precedent that shows proof of concept within this system. And, if I have been doing the Jaylen Wright question a lot, I've been doing a damn book tour on this offensive line question, going across to different platforms and answering this question. So, and I go back to this. If you go back to Alex Gibbs, who was the offensive line coach for the Broncos team that won back-to-back championships in the 90s under Mike Shanahan, who is the godfather of this entire system, the wide zone running system, it's a core tenet that they don't really go after interior offensive linemen highly in the draft. They don't take them in the first round. They don't take them in the second round. The third round's about where they start to get interested in those players. And the Dolphins have followed suit with that. And that's only on the interior, because like the tackle position, Teron Armstead was a big time free agent acquisition. Patrick Paul, a premium draft pick in the second round. Austin Jackson has the extension. Kendall Lamb is one of the best swing tackles in the game. So they definitely have put investments into that position. Where I think the disconnect comes from the fan base to what the team, believes and does is this system is built upon the playmakers and the quarterback, and we have all those in spades, right? We saw them go after the running back position in the draft, go after Jonnu Smith in free agency, go after Odell Beckham in free agency, Malik Washington in the draft. And I think they value the continuity and chemistry on the interior more so than, someone that you would go out and spend big money on and try to teach them a different style of football from what they're used to, which is where they got that big money. So it's like when you hire a new employee or promote someone who's really good at their job, and then you say, you're good at that job, let's go ahead and put you in a position where you're doing nothing else that constitutes what you did before, and we're going to give you a whole bunch of more money, and then you don't perform at the same level, it's like, well, now we have this hole where we paid all this money for a guy that doesn't maybe do the way we want to do it, the way we want to do it. So I think with Rob Jones, you mentioned Lester Cotton, Liam Eichenberg, those guys have all been in the system for 3 years now. And I feel like we would have to be crazy to question the fact that Mike McDaniel's sitting there watching film in the offseason and watching the offensive line and knowing with Chris Grier there beside him, like, we have this money that we created from all of our, this very well-run, Excel sheet of how our salary cap runs, to think that they're watching film and be like, it's terrible, we can't win with that, let's just ignore it. They wouldn't do that. So I think that their belief in the chemistry and continuity up front is what gives them confidence. And then I think the other answers they have beyond Tyreek and Waddle in both the running game and the passing game is kind of their fix to what went wrong last year down the stretch. So a long way of saying I think it's crazy to side with anybody besides Mike McDaniel.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we have to trust the guys that are watching it day in and day out. So fingers crossed on that one, and good luck on your continued book tour. I'm sure we'll keep
appreciate
going.
that.
Okay, so to talk about, continue with the offensive line, many Dolphin fans, including myself, found the release of Jack Driscoll last week pretty surprising. Do you think that the Dolphins at all re-sign him after the week 1 game when the contracts aren't fully guaranteed?
Yeah, that's one of the things that you can do, right? Because there's, and I'm not sure the exact rules on it, so I don't want to speak too deeply on it, but there's rules about vested veterans and guaranteed money before week 1 and after week 1. So I think that's a possibility. I think that there's always a possibility that they're going to look at other, resources or other guys that can come in and do what they want them to do. And, to kind of piggyback off the last question, like, the precedent across the league is the Niners are a good example of it, because obviously the system comes from them, or like the Packers are, a team that runs a similar system, that the Vikings kind of run an offshoot of it, the Rams and the Bengals. And a lot of those teams have the fan bases have the exact same questions with the offensive line. And then we get to the end of the year, and these are all the top 10 offenses in the NFL, all those guys. So I think that if Driscoll's a guy they believe is a good fit for the system, I don't personally know if they believe that or not, then it's certainly a possibility.
Okay. Well, we will keep an eye out and see what happens. So let's talk to you a little bit about Teron Armstead. Excuse me. We love Teron, not necessarily known the past, year or two to play every single game, unfortunately. So if he does go down or has to come out of the game for a bit, is Kendall Lamb in your eyes the backup left tackle still, or did Patrick Paul show you enough in training camp to be the guy who sees the field if Armstead isn't out there?
I think it would be Kendall Lamb. And they kind of showed you that with the playing time in training camp and in the preseason games. And they did run the ones out there. It was Kendall Lamb getting those reps with the first team. And he's back. He mentioned the one more ride for him before he goes off into the sunset. One of the best people you can ever meet. Kendall Lamb is an absolute gem. But yeah, I think that he's in line to play there because you have proof of concept with him, where with Patrick Paul, I've talked about his ability to great lengths and how good I think he can be in this league. But I think it would best serve him to continue to rep, this different style of offense, because again, it's so different. And this is like true of the offensive line compared to the rest of the NFL. But when you go to the college game and you have these offenses that prioritize, like, get off the ground and get back to the line of scrimmage, and we're going to go on the quick count again. Like, it's just a different game. There's different pass sets. There's different, anchor points in the running game. So to kind of have his first year, and I don't think you're going to just put him on the bench entirely if it gets to the point where you have to use him. But ideally, I think he can just sit back and learn and bank, thousands of reps in practice, throughout the course of the season before he has to go put it to test in the game and actually, put game tape out there. So I think ideally it's a redshirt year in that regard. But also, like, if I want to run a 6 offensive lineman package, who do I want to put in there besides like Patrick Paul as a 6th guy? So we'll see. But to answer your question, it's got to be Kendall Lamb from opening day.
Fair enough. All right. So we all know that head coach Mike McDaniel officially got re-signed to a new contract. We're going to have him through 2028. And this is his official 3rd year with this offense, which has been very successful in Miami. What kind of new wrinkles may we see this season that we haven't seen in years past?
Specifically, I actually don't know, because this is a comment again on the book tour. I've made this comment a few times. The cheat motion that we saw last year in that Chargers game that was just like, whoa, where did that come from? That was the first time I saw that. So they do a great job of not showing the open practices, what they're tip in their hand as far as what they might do come the regular season. So what is it specifically? No clue. Couldn't tell you. Will there be something? I think so, because I just think that when McDaniel has, he's probably been working since about that Kansas City game ended at probably, right around midnight on January 9th. Like he was probably working at 1 a.m. on January 9th. So he was quickly back in the lab getting to work on what this offense might look like. And I would be very surprised if him and Frank Smith and the entire coaching staff didn't have something new up their sleeves that we haven't seen before. What is that? No idea. I can't wait to find out.
I can't wait to find out either. Do you think we're going to get rid of the end zone fade?
No, because there is a place for it when coverage dictates a certain way. Like, so I saw the commentary on the Craycraft touchdown back in preseason, which by the way, they scored. So why are we complaining? I never understood that, but from that look, like it was 4th and 1 or whatever it was, 4th and 2, and River won the route right away. So he he faked crossing face of the cornerback, and that got him to stack the DB. Once that happens, Tua, the touchdown to beat the Chargers last year was a fade. He throws a perfect ball. So if I have a quarterback that puts the ball right where it needs to be, like you can steal touchdowns that way. So I'm not as anti-fade as the fan base seems to be, especially when it works.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Well, maybe we'll do it. We have a great tight end group this season. So maybe it'll go to a tight end. All right. So who is a player that you've seen that you think is flying under the radar who may be in store for a breakout season this year?
Yeah, great transition there to the tight end position, because I'm going with Julian Hill. And I don't know that you'll see it in the box score because I'm not really sure what his receiving production will be. But I think we saw glimpses of it last year in the running game when he would come across in motion and just wrap that defensive end and kind of put him on their butt. And then on top of that, when he gets to the second level, no defensive back wants to see him coming because he's so physical and so, timed up in his blocking that he really makes those shots clean and squares them up to put those guys on their back. So I think the addition of Jonnu Smith also kind of unlocks what he can do and what he can be from these different personnel groupings, because, nobody runs more 21 personnel with 2 backs than we do. The Niners are right there as well. And then I think on top of that, you have different options with 12 personnel with 2 tight ends, maybe even 22 personnel with 2 backs and 2 tight ends. So I think that all those things combined together creates an opportunity for Julian Hill to be very productive in the running game and a guy that can help in the pass protection scheme as well. And then maybe he adds a little wrinkle in the passing game as well. But I don't know if it'll show up in the box score necessarily, but I think that his impact on this team in 2024 is going to be significant.
I'm excited. I'm excited for us to incorporate a tight end more this season. I mean, we know it's definitely a offense that can incorporate that because we know that Kyle Shanahan does it so well, especially when you have a guy named George Kittle that's out there doing that for you. It doesn't hurt at all, but I'm excited to see that in Julian Hill for sure. We'll keep an eye out for him. So let's pivot now to this upcoming game that we have. I cannot believe that Sunday already. It is here. It is September. I'm ready for the leaves to change. Maybe not in South Florida, but here where I am. So this Sunday versus Jacksonville, who we know is a good team, well coached, Trevor Lawrence as the quarterback. How do you see this Sunday's game playing out?
Yeah, first of all, I miss almost nothing about my hometown in terms of the weather, but I do miss September and October. It's the absolute best time of year.
It's best, absolutely.
The orange and brown leaves and running around with my Dolphins flag after wins, you can't replace that. But yeah, as far as the Jags go, I think they're maybe a little bit under the radar because of how they finished last season. I think Trevor Lawrence is a really good player. I think that the contract that he got certainly, shows you what the Jags think about him. And they did a good job of kind of building out their skill groups to give them more flexibility and kind of round out his game as well. Because I think that Brian Thomas Jr., their first round draft pick, is a guy that adds an element to their receiving game they didn't have last year, and the ability to go vertical and stretch the field that way. And Gabe Davis can do some of that. I think that that's not really his A game, but it is in his bag. So they have more vertical options to create more space for a Christian Kirk, who is just an absolute monster, in the intermediate and underneath stuff. And then Evan Ingram, who's one of the best tight ends in the game, and Travis Etienne, who's one of the better backs in the game. So they have weapons. But if you go back to the preseason and kind of some of the camp reports, the questions there were, and this is kind of across the league, Marissa, like offensive lines, there's just not there's not many lines where you have, 5 or 6 guys. You're like, these guys are all great players and we feel great about it. Like it's a thin position across the league, kind of like the cornerback spot. And so I think for them, that's kind of the area they were concerned about, because I just did a podcast on Drive Time that comes out on Friday. I'm not sure when we're having this episode come out, but with a Jags beat reporter who said that a lot of the big plays they had in camp, they were wondering, was he sacked on the play, because they run the play out after the fact. So I think that offensive line might be where the Dolphins can kind of, slow this offense down a little bit if they are going to. And then on the other side of the ball, new coordinator, who I like a lot, Ryan Nielsen from Atlanta. It's going to be more pressure, more two-man. They're going to probably try to copy the Chiefs type of game plan from the playoffs last year, which, again, like the Chargers stopped us in 2022, and then they thought they had the answer in 2023. 36 points later and 466 passing yards later. How did that work out? So I kind of love the idea of having, here's what teams think might work against us. We're going to go ahead and have a curveball for that. So I'm curious to see what that looks like. But they've got names on that side of the ball too. They were the 26th passing defense in the league last year. And I think coming in against a Dolphins offense that is ready to go from day one could be a challenge for them. I think the Dolphins will score a lot in this game. And then it kind of comes down to how much the Jags can score on their side of the ball. But I think that Miami, so here's a fun stat for you. Last year, they played one new defensive coordinator in the month of September. So trying to get his feet wet, they scored 70 points in that game. In 2022, they played one new defensive coordinator and scored 42 points in that game. And that guy was Mike McDonald, who didn't allow more than like 27 points the rest of his career after that. So the Dolphins have a way of hanging big numbers on new DCs. I hope that trend continues.
I was going to say, I hope that continues as well. So would you say that, what would be like, if you had to say like 2 things, like these are the things Miami has to do to win, would you have like 2 things you could maybe nail it down to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they have to find ways to get pressure on Lawrence without blitzing too frequently. And of course they'll mix it up and they'll get their pressures in there with how this defense operates and trying to, change the picture on Lawrence and confuse him and make him hold the ball a beat longer. But if they can get one-on-one pass rush wins and disrupt the offense that way, I think this coverage can really lock things down with the extra help back there. And then offensively, just be efficient in your short and medium yardage situations and stay on the field, because I think the longer they're on the field against a team that, even though they're in the state of Florida, it's tough to condition for these types of games in September in Miami. If they can just sustain their drives offensively, the big plays will come. So converting and running the football on offense and then getting pressure on Lawrence on defense would be my 2 top keys.
Fair enough. Now, so this episode is going to drop this afternoon, and I mean, it's already afternoon, so we're going to drop it here shortly. Are you allowed to give us a score prediction?
Score prediction for the game. Like I said, I think the Dolphins will score. So I am going to go, let's go 38, Dolphins 38, Jags 24.
Ooh, I like it. Get a little generous with those Dolphin numbers. I enjoy it. All right, before we get you out of here, I have to ask you this. I just did this quick little fun giveaway on my personal social media, and I asked fans to list how many passing yards they thought Tua was going to have against the Jags. And so I'm just curious, we'll just have you play for fun. How many passing yards do you think Tua will have?
Let's go with 340.
340. I'm bookmarking it. I'll let you know how you do.
Sweet. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, Travis, I know your time is very valuable, so we appreciate you being here. So just to talk a little bit too about what Travis has going on, you can find his work at miamidolphins.com. And he actually does a post-game show with Seth Levitt and OJ on Big 105.9 after each and every Dolphins game. Make sure you check that out. He also has something he announced recently where he is doing Dolphins HQ every week on Miami Dolphins YouTube channel and CBS Miami. Travis, can you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, we actually just taped our first episode today. So that comes out on Thursday on the YouTube channel. And I'm not sure the time slot on CBS Miami on Saturday, but that's when that episode drops. Yeah, very excited about that. It's essentially trying to expand Drive Time to more of a video platform. And I think that where the episodes are really going to take off is when we have game tape to go back and look at, because it's kind of like my Tuesday podcast where I break into the all 22 and really get to the nitty gritty of the why of what happened, win or lose. We're going to try to bring that to a video element to give you kind of the visual component to go along with all the yapping that I do, as my friend Mike here would say. So it is, yeah, it's going to be on YouTube. I think it's I think there's no time restrictions for the YouTube channel, but the TV show is a half hour. But yeah, we're going to be talking about the matchups, looking back at the games. We'll go into the locker room and talk to players. I have a special guest on this week's episode who stole the microphone from me and went rogue and did his own thing. So keep an eye out for that. It's every Thursday on YouTube and Saturdays on CBS Miami, like you mentioned.
Awesome. Well, I cannot wait to tune in. That sounds like it's going to be an absolute great time. And I can't wait to find out who that guest was that stole the mic and took the show away from you. You can also find Travis on Twitter at Wingfield NFL. So at Wingfield NFL on Twitter. Travis, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Any parting words for all the listeners out there in Dolphins Nation with season starting on Sunday?
Just telling you to keep doing your thing and keep crushing it. It's cool to see someone come into the space so quickly and kind of make an impact. So there's lots of content out there, lots of good content. So Marissa, it's cool that you're doing this and having a fun time with it, and you keep getting great guests and whatnot. So keep doing your thing, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Thank you so much. I love how Travis says you keep getting good guests and it's on his episode.
Yeah. Maybe cut that out a little bit. Before me, you had good guests.
Before you. All right. Well, everybody out there in Fins Nation, we hope you have a great rest of your day, and fins up.